Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. You know, you guys send us so many great sources, and today we're diving deep into one you've been asking about a lot, India's energy future.
Yeah, lots of questions about India's energy future and whether they can really pull off this green transition everyone's talking about.
Well, we're going to find out right now. We're looking at this report called Unlocking India's RE and Green Hydrogen Potential, an assessment of land, water, and climate nexus.
Catchy title.
Right, and it's from the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water.
CEW.
Yeah, CEW.
They're a pretty big deal, actually, like one of the top climate think tanks, especially when it comes to Asia.
Oh, wow. So they really know their stuff.
Yeah, and they actually work directly with the Indian government, so, they're not just some outside group. They've got their finger on the pulse of what's actually happening.
That's reassuring,
Amen.
So we can trust that their analysis is, pretty solid.
Yeah, that's...
So basically, they're looking at how India can actually achieve its goals for renewable energy and green hydrogen. But here's the thing. They're taking into account all the limitations: land, water, climate risks, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, they're not sugarcoating anything. This report gets into the nitty-gritty details.
Which is exactly what we like, so get ready, because some of these findings are pretty surprising.
Yeah, you might want to buckle up for this one.
Okay, first things first. What's the big picture here? What's the overall potential for renewable energy in India?
Okay, so the first thing that jumps out at you when you read this report is the sheer scale. We're talking over 24,000 gigawatts of potential renewable energy.
24,000.
Yeah, 24,000. To put that into perspective, they estimate that India needs about 7,000 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity to become carbon neutral by 2070.
Okay, wait, so they have way more potential than they actually need.
Way more.
Wow, that's incredible. Seems like solar is the real powerhouse here, right? What is it about India that makes solar so promising?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Solar takes the lead. And it makes sense when you think about it. India's got so much sunshine, and they're currently really dependent on imported fossil fuels.
Ah, okay, so this could really be a game changer for them.
It really could. It could completely change their energy landscape.
And I remember reading that India wants to become energy independent by 2047.
That's right, 2047.
So this kind of solar capacity could be a huge step towards that goal.
Absolutely. This report suggests it's actually within reach.
Okay, so that's huge. But this report doesn't stop at solar, right? It also digs into green hydrogen.
It does, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
So according to the report, India could produce around 40 million tons of green hydrogen every year.
40 million tons.
Yeah, and get this, they could do it for less than $3.50 per kilogram.
Okay, hold up. I need a little explainer here. What exactly is green hydrogen?
So green hydrogen is made by splitting water molecules using renewable energy. Basically, no carbon emissions involved.
Gotcha. So it's clean hydrogen.
Super clean.
But why is that $3.50 per kilogram price tag such a big deal?
Well, that price is groundbreaking because it puts green hydrogen on par with hydrogen made from fossil fuels, which is how most of it's produced today.
So we're talking about a clean energy source that's not only good for the environment,
Yeah.
but it also makes economic sense.
Exactly. That's what makes it so exciting.
That's pretty incredible. What kind of implications does this have for industries that rely on hydrogen?
Oh, man. Think of all sorts of industries. Fertilizer production, refineries, steel manufacturing, even transportation.
They all use hydrogen.
Yeah, they all rely heavily on hydrogen. But until now, it's come with a hefty carbon footprint.
Right, because it's made from fossil fuels.
Exactly. But green hydrogen changes the game for them.
So it sounds like India is sitting on a gold mine of clean energy potential, with both solar and green hydrogen taking center stage. It all sounds very promising. But I have a feeling it can't be all smooth sailing, right? There must be some catches.
Oh yeah, you're definitely right about that. There are some serious hurdles to overcome. This report is very honest about that.
Okay, so spill the beans. What are the challenges?
Well, the potential is enormous, but actually tapping into it, that's not going to be easy. And one of the biggest constraints they highlight is land.
Land, huh? I imagine with a population as large as India's, finding space for anything is a challenge, let alone sprawling renewable energy projects.
Exactly. Land is already in high demand. Agriculture, mining, cities, they're all competing for space.
It's a crowded place.
It is. And when you consider the sheer scale of land needed for these projects, it gets really complicated.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. The report found that 30% of India's best locations for wind power, those areas with really strong and consistent winds,
Yeah.
30% of those areas are also in places with active mining operations.
Okay, so you've got wind farms competing with mining companies for the same land.
Exactly. And mining can be a lot more profitable.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's probably hard to convince anyone to give up that land for wind farms instead.
It's a tough sell.
What about water? I know green hydrogen production uses a lot of water. Is that a concern in India as well?
Oh, yeah, water is definitely a crucial factor, especially for green hydrogen.
Yeah.
And the report points out that only about 56 million tons per year of potential green hydrogen production are actually located in areas where water isn't a problem.
So the other 44 million tons.
Would likely involve transporting water across vast distances
Jets, it's expensive.
and adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Okay, so we've got land availability and water scarcity to contend with. Anything else standing in the way of India achieving this clean energy dream?
Well, those are the two big ones, but there are a couple more.
Okay, what else is there?
The report also highlights the issues of climate risk and land prices.
So not all land is created equal, I guess.
Nope. It turns out that only a small fraction of those prime locations for wind and solar power, about 18% for wind and 22% for solar, have both low climate risks and affordable land.
So it's kind of like trying to find the perfect recipe. You need the right ingredients in the right amounts at the right time. And in this case, it sounds like those ingredients are scarce.
It's a delicate balancing act, for sure.
Okay, I'm starting to see the challenge here.
Yeah.
But how does the report suggest India navigate this land-water climate puzzle?
Well, that's where the report gets even more interesting, because they don't just look at these limitations one by one.
They look at it all together.
They analyze them together, and that's where they uncover some really crucial trade-offs.
Trade-offs, huh? I like where this is going.
Yeah, it gets pretty thought-provoking.
Tell me more. What kind of trade-offs are we talking about?
Okay, so imagine India wants to install, let's say, 100 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity.
Okay, 100 gigawatts.
They'd probably start with the most ideal locations, right? Lots of sun, cheap land, easy access to water, low climate risks.
The best of the best.
Exactly. But what happens when they want to scale up to 500 gigawatts?
Yeah, that's a lot more.
Or even 1,000?
Okay, yeah, now you're really pushing it.
Suddenly they're forced to consider places that aren't so ideal.
So the more renewable energy they want, the tougher the choices become.
Exactly.
Fascinating. So what are some of the tough choices they might have to make?
Well, the report actually found that to hit that 7,000 gigawatt target for carbon neutrality,
That's the target we talked about earlier.
yeah, that one, they might have to build in areas with a high risk of earthquakes.
Really? I thought those areas were usually off limits for big infrastructure projects.
They usually are. But if India wants to reach its goals, they might not have a choice.
Wow. So they're really going to have to weigh the risks and benefits carefully.
Yeah, and it's not just about earthquakes. They might also have to look at land in densely populated areas.
Which could be tricky.
Very tricky. It could lead to all sorts of conflicts with local communities.
Right, because people might not want to live next to a giant solar farm or wind turbine. It sounds like this land-water climate nexus creates a real dilemma for India.
Yeah, it's a tough nut to crack.
So does the report just leave us hanging with these challenges? Or do they offer some potential solutions?
Don't worry, they do offer some solutions.
Okay, good, because I was starting to get a little worried.
And they're particularly relevant for you considering the kinds of questions you've been asking.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Hit me with those recommendations. What's the first step India could take? One of their big recommendations is to create something called graded land banks.
Graded land banks.
Uh-huh.
That sounds intriguing, but I have no idea what that means.
Okay, so think of it like a rating system for land, but specifically for renewable energy projects.
Okay, I'm listening.
They would look at things like solar and wind potential, water availability, how easy it is to connect to the power grid, all those important factors.
And then they'd give each piece of land a grade. So
Exactly.
instead of everyone just scrambling for land, there would be a more organized system that considers all the important factors up front.
Yeah, and that could help to avoid potential conflicts early on.
Oh, that's a great idea. I can see how that
Yes.
would make things a lot smoother. What other ideas do they have?
Another really interesting suggestion is to look at India's offshore potential, particularly for exporting green hydrogen and ammonia.
Offshore wind. We talked about the potential earlier.
Yeah.
But why focus on exports? Wouldn't it make more sense to use that energy domestically?
Well, connecting offshore wind farms to the onshore grid can be really expensive and technically challenging.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if you're producing green hydrogen or ammonia offshore, You can ship it directly to other countries.
You bypass the grid completely.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. India has such a vast coastline, it makes perfect sense to utilize that resource.
It does.
And this could even open up new opportunities for collaboration with other countries in the clean energy sector.
Oh, definitely. It could be a win-win for everyone involved.
I'm loving these solutions. They seem so innovative and tailored to India's specific context. But I know we've been focusing on the technical and economic side of things. Does this report address the potential social impacts of these clean energy projects?
It does, and it's something you're clearly interested in as well.
Absolutely. It's a huge part of the equation. What kind of solutions do they suggest for ensuring that clean energy development doesn't negatively impact local communities?
One of their main recommendations is to develop mechanisms to make sure local communities are directly involved in the planning process.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about the people too.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between pushing for clean energy and protecting the rights and needs of the people who live in these areas.
It sounds like a complex challenge.
It is, but it's a challenge that we need to address head-on.
Okay, so we've talked about land availability, water scarcity, climate risks, and the importance of community engagement. Is there anything else we need to consider?
Well, there's one more thing that might surprise you.
Okay, what is it?
The report highlights the need to prevent desertification.
Wait, desertification, what does that have to do with renewable energy?
Well, some of the best areas for renewable energy in India, especially in the state of Rajasthan, are already in desert regions.
Ah, okay, I see.
As desertification spreads, it threatens to shrink the amount of land suitable for these projects.
So it's not just about finding new land, it's about protecting the land that's already viable.
That's exactly right.
That's a really important point.
And they emphasize the need to take action. Things like building green walls or restoring degraded land to try to stop the deserts from expanding.
So we've unpacked a lot here. India's massive clean energy potential, the interconnected challenges of land, water, and climate, and some creative solutions. What does all of this mean for our listeners? What are the key takeaways you think they should be thinking about?
The main takeaway is that India has a remarkable opportunity to become a leader in the global clean energy transition. But the path ahead is not going to be simple.
It's going to be bumpy.
It's going to require strategic planning, innovative solutions, and a strong commitment to addressing the social and environmental consequences along the way.
It's not just about the technology, it's about the people and the planet.
You got it. And while this report focuses on the technical and economic aspects, it raises a crucial question for everyone listening. How can India balance rapid development with ensuring fairness and minimizing the impact on vulnerable communities?
That's a great question, and one that deserves further exploration. We'll definitely be diving deeper into those socio-political dimensions in our next part.
Definitely a lot more to unpack.
So stay tuned, because this conversation is just getting started.
It is. Buckle up. Yeah, it's a huge question with big implications for India's future, and it's great you're thinking about it. The report does acknowledge that it's mainly focused on the technical and economic stuff, but there's a whole other layer when you start thinking about social equity, community rights, the whole political landscape.
You're right, those socio-political dimensions are critical. So where do we even begin to unpack all of that? What are the key things we should be thinking about?
Well, a good place to start is land ownership and access in India. It's a really complex issue with a long history, and it directly impacts who benefits from this renewable energy development and who might end up paying the price.
We talked about land availability being a constraint, but I imagine it's much more nuanced than just whether there's enough physical space.
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial to consider who actually owns the land, who has the right to use it, and how those rights are distributed.
Right, because land ownership in India isn't always straightforward.
It's definitely not, and often the best land for these renewable energy projects, it's in rural areas where communities depend on that land for their livelihoods.
So if you build a massive solar farm on land that was traditionally used for grazing or farming, you could end up disrupting those livelihoods and creating conflict.
Exactly, and that's why community engagement is so important. The report talks about involving local communities in the planning process, but in reality, that can be quite challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There's often a power imbalance between those big developers and rural communities.
Right. The developers have all the money and resources.
Exactly. So navigating those dynamics requires a lot of sensitivity and a real commitment to transparency.
It sounds like there's a real risk of repeating existing inequalities if this transition isn't handled carefully.
There is, and we need to think beyond just that top-down approach to energy policy, empowering communities to participate in the decisions. And ensuring they benefit from this transition is key.
It's about making sure everyone's voice is heard.
Absolutely.
That brings up another aspect of the socio-political dimension that I'm curious about. The distribution of benefits. Even if conflicts over land are avoided, who actually reaps the rewards of these projects?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of equity. The report mentions equitable access to resources, but that doesn't just happen magically.
It takes effort.
It does. We need to think about job creation, local ownership of these projects, and making sure the energy produced actually benefits the communities where those projects are located.
So it's not enough to just build the infrastructure. It's about building a system that works for everyone.
Exactly. It requires a shift in mindset, not just from policymakers, but from developers and investors, too.
Yeah, they need to be on board as well.
They do. We need to move away from that old extractive model, where resources are taken from communities without much consideration for their well-being.
Right. It's about moving towards a more sustainable and inclusive model.
Exactly. One that benefits everyone involved.
Makes sense. But even with the best intentions and the most innovative solutions, none of this will happen without strong political leadership, right?
You hit the nail on the head. The success of India's energy transition hinges on the government's commitment to these goals.
So it all comes down to politics.
In a way, it does.
Are they willing to implement bold policies?
That's the big question.
Can they navigate the inevitable pushback from those who benefit from the status quo?
Because you know there are going to be powerful forces that resist this change.
The fossil fuel industry, for example, they have a lot to lose as India shifts towards renewable energy.
Absolutely. They're not going to give up without a fight.
So this is where political leadership is so crucial.
It is. It takes courage to prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term profits.
And to champion the needs of the many over the interests of the few.
That's right. It's about making tough choices that might not be popular with everyone.
It also requires effective governance and regulations to ensure transparency, accountability, and a level playing field.
Oh, that's often overlooked, but it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, you can have all the renewable energy potential in the world.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a solid system to manage it, you're setting yourself up for problems down the road.
Exactly. You need clear rules, clear guidelines, and strong oversight mechanisms.
To make sure things are done properly.
Right? And that everyone is playing by the same rules.
So we've covered land ownership, the distribution of benefits, the crucial role of political will, and the need for good governance. But I'm also wondering about the people on the ground, the communities most directly impacted by these projects. What are their thoughts on this energy transition?
That's where things get even more nuanced. The report itself doesn't go too deep into specific community perspectives, but we can get some insights from the data it presents on land conflicts.
You're right. The report showed that a significant portion of India's renewable energy potential is located in areas where there have been land conflicts.
Exactly. And while those conflicts may not always be directly tied to renewable energy, they do signal that there's already a lot of tension around land use and resource allocation in these areas.
It's a red flag.
It is. And we can also learn from the experiences of other countries that have gone through similar energy transitions.
That's a good point. So what are some of the key lessons we can learn from those experiences? What's worked well? What hasn't?
One thing that comes up again and again is the importance of getting free, prior, and informed consent from indigenous communities and other marginalized groups whose lands and livelihoods might be affected by these projects.
Free, prior, and informed consent. Can you explain what that means in practice? What does that look like on the ground?
It basically boils down to ensuring that communities have the right to be fully informed about the potential impacts of any project, to participate in the decision-making process from the very beginning, and to say yes or no without feeling pressured or manipulated.
So it's not enough to just hold a community meeting after the project has already been planned out.
No, definitely not.
You need to engage with them right from the start and give them a real voice in the process.
Exactly. It's about building trust and relationships, not just viewing communities as obstacles to overcome.
And it also means recognizing that communities might have different priorities and values than developers or policymakers. What might seem like a clean energy project to one person could be seen as a threat to their cultural heritage or their way of life by someone else.
Right. And those perspectives deserve to be taken seriously. It's not about imposing a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding ways to tailor these projects to fit the specific needs and context of each community.
So to circle back, it's not just about the technology or the economics. It's about respecting human rights and ensuring that this energy transition is truly equitable and inclusive.
That's a great way to put it. It requires going beyond just the numbers and technical details to really consider the lived experiences and perspectives of the people who will be most affected by these decisions.
Okay, so we've touched on the complexities of land ownership, the vital role of community engagement, and the need for free, prior, and informed consent. What other sociopolitical dimensions should we be thinking about as we consider India's green energy potential?
Another really important factor that sometimes gets overlooked is the potential for corruption. In any large-scale project, especially ones involving big investments and government subsidies, there's always a risk of corruption creeping in.
Okay, but aren't we being a bit pessimistic here? Shouldn't we assume that everyone involved has good intentions?
It's not about being pessimistic, it's about being realistic. And in India, with all the bureaucratic hurdles and regulatory complexities, the potential for abuse is even greater.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
So how can we prevent that from happening? How can we make sure this transition stays on track?
Transparency and accountability are key. We need strong regulatory frameworks that have clear guidelines and oversight mechanisms.
So basically a system of checks and balances.
Exactly. This can help ensure that projects are awarded fairly, funds are used properly, and that communities have access to information and a way to voice concerns if something goes wrong.
That sounds good in theory, but in practice it can be hard to enforce those rules, especially when powerful interests are at play.
It's true, enforcing those rules can be difficult. That's why a vigilant civil society and independent media and strong institutions that can hold those in power accountable are so important.
So it's not just about having the right policies written down. It's about having the political will and the right institutions in place to actually put those policies into practice.
Absolutely. And it also requires building a culture of transparency and ethical conduct, not just in the government, but in the private sector as well.
It's about changing the way things are done.
It is. It's a big challenge, but it's not impossible.
I'm glad you're optimistic.
Ah.
There's another aspect we haven't touched on yet that's really important to me: labor unions and worker rights. How will this shift to clean energy impact workers in the fossil fuel industry?
You're right. That's a critical consideration. As India moves away from fossil fuels, there will inevitably be job losses in those industries.
That's a tough reality to face.
It is, but it's important that we acknowledge it.
So what can be done to support those workers?
It's crucial that we ensure those workers are provided with opportunities for retraining and reskilling.
So they can transition to jobs in the renewable energy sector.
Exactly. There's a huge demand for skilled workers in the clean energy industry.
That's good to hear.
And those new jobs need to be good jobs, fair wages, safe working conditions, and the right to organize.
The green energy transition shouldn't come at the expense of worker rights or social justice.
I completely agree. We need to make sure that this transition is a just transition for everyone involved. It's not just about replacing dirty energy with clean energy, it's about creating a more equitable and sustainable future for all.
I love that, a just transition. So as we've been discussing, the sociopolitical aspects of India's energy transition are incredibly complex and multifaceted. It's clear that it's not just about the technology or the economics, it's about equity, justice, and ensuring that this transition benefits everyone.
That's a great summary. And while this report lays out a solid foundation for understanding the technical and economic potential, it's up to all of us to really grapple with these bigger questions and advocate for a truly just and sustainable energy future for India.
That's a powerful message. So we've talked about the challenges, the potential pitfalls, and the complex socio-political landscape surrounding India's green energy ambitions. But the report doesn't just leave us hanging with a list of problems, right? What are some of the key solutions they propose?
They do offer some concrete solutions. You remember those graded land banks we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah, those graded land banks. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that would work. Can you remind me why that's such a promising solution?
It's all about making the process of finding suitable land for these projects more efficient and less prone to conflict. By categorizing land based on its renewable energy, potential water availability, grid connectivity, and other factors, they can create a system that makes it easier to identify the best locations. and avoid those tricky situations where clean energy development clashes with other land uses.
So it's like a matchmaking service for renewable energy projects and land.
That's a great way to put it.
What other solutions do they suggest?
They also highlight the potential of India's vast coastline. Remember how we talked about the challenges of connecting offshore wind farms to the onshore grid?
Yeah, it can get pretty expensive and complicated.
They suggest focusing on producing green hydrogen and ammonia offshore for export.
Right. That way you can ship the green hydrogen directly to other countries. You sidestep that whole grid connection issue.
Exactly. It's like turning a challenge into an opportunity.
What other innovative solutions are they proposing?
They also emphasize the need to address those social impacts we've been discussing. One of their main recommendations is to create mechanisms that ensure local communities are directly involved in the planning process for these projects.
I love that they're really stressing the importance of community engagement. What are some specific ways they suggest involving communities?
They propose a few key strategies. First, they highlight the importance of making sure communities have access to all the information about the project, including potential risks and benefits.
So full transparency.
Exactly. Second, they stress the need for meaningful consultation, going beyond just informing communities to actually seeking their input and feedback on the project design.
So it's a two-way conversation.
It is. And finally, they advocate for giving communities a real voice in the decision-making process, ensuring they have a genuine say in whether or not the project goes forward.
That's so encouraging. It sounds like they're really pushing for a more inclusive and participatory approach to energy development. What other recommendations do they make?
One of their final recommendations, and it might sound a little surprising at first, is to focus on preventing desertification.
Now that you mention it, we did touch on that earlier, but I'm still not quite sure how it connects to renewable energy. Can you remind me why that's so important?
It's all about protecting the land that's already suitable for renewable energy projects. Remember how we discussed that some of the best areas for solar and wind power in India are in desert regions?
Well, that's right.
Well, if desertification continues to spread, those areas could become unusable for energy production.
So it's not just about finding new land for renewables. It's about taking steps to protect the land that's already viable.
Exactly. And they suggest several strategies to combat desertification, like planting trees to create green barriers and restoring degraded land to prevent further soil erosion.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored India's massive potential, the complex web of constraints, and some really innovative solutions. What does all of this mean for someone like me who's trying to understand India's green energy future?
The big takeaway is that India has an incredible opportunity to become a global leader in the transition to clean energy. But it's not going to be easy. Achieving those ambitious goals will require careful planning, creative solutions, and a strong commitment to addressing the social and environmental impacts along the way.
It's not just about the technology, it's about the people and the planet.
You got it. And while this report provides a great overview of the technical and economic aspects, it raises a really important question for everyone listening. How can India balance this rapid development with ensuring fairness and minimizing the impact on vulnerable communities?
That's a great question to keep in mind as we continue this conversation. So far, we've focused primarily on India's domestic energy goals. But this transition has implications that extend far beyond India's borders, right? What are some of the global implications we should be thinking about?
Yeah, it definitely does. India's energy choices really do have a ripple effect that's felt all over the world.
Right, because it's not just a small player we're talking about here.
Exactly. It's the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So, its actions have a major impact on global climate change.
Makes sense. So if India can actually pull off this transition to a cleaner energy system, what kind of impact could that have on the global effort to combat climate change?
Well, for one thing, it would send a really powerful signal to other countries, especially those developing nations that are trying to figure out their own path. It would show them that a clean energy future is actually possible.
It's like a proof of concept.
Exactly. India's success could inspire and empower others to follow suit, and that could lead to a much faster global shift towards renewable energy.
That's so exciting to think about. It's like a domino effect, where one country's actions can trigger positive change around the world.
I love that analogy. It's a perfect way to describe it.
And it's not just about setting an example, right? India's transition to clean energy could also directly impact global emissions reductions.
Oh, absolutely. By reducing its reliance on fossil fuels, India would make a big contribution to the global effort to curb those greenhouse gas emissions.
That's huge. It really highlights how interconnected this whole issue is. What other global implications do you see?
While beyond climate change, India's clean energy transition could also have a big impact on the global economy. Remember, we talked about India's potential to become a major exporter of green hydrogen?
Yes, that was one of the most interesting solutions they proposed in the report.
Right. And if India can really capitalize on that opportunity, it could become a major player in that emerging global green hydrogen market.
Wow. So not only would they be boosting their own economy,
Right.
but they'd also be helping to decarbonize other sectors like shipping and aviation, which are really tough to electrify.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation.
India gets to lead the way in a new industry while also contributing to global decarbonization efforts.
It's a really exciting possibility.
It really is. It paints a picture of a much more sustainable and interconnected global future.
So we've talked about the global implications, but I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the need for hope and possibility. Given all the complexities and challenges we've discussed, where do you personally find that sense of hope?
That's a great question. And, for me, I find hope in the ingenuity and resilience of the Indian people.
They've been through a lot. They have. Throughout history, India has faced countless obstacles, and they've always found a way to adapt and overcome. I see that same spirit of innovation and determination in the way they're approaching this energy transition.
They're not afraid of a challenge.
Not at all. And it's not just about following the same path as developed countries. It's about forging their own unique path, one that's rooted in their own context and their own values.
It's about finding solutions that work for India, not just copying what's been done elsewhere.
You got it. And that's where the real hope lies. In the belief that India can lead the way in creating a truly sustainable and equitable energy future, not just for itself, but for the entire world.
That's a really inspiring perspective. It makes me feel optimistic about their ability to tackle this challenge head on.
Me too. And it's not just about tackling the challenge, it's about doing it in a way that's truly equitable and just. And this report, while focusing on the technical and economic aspects, does highlight the need to consider those broader social and environmental implications, which is fantastic.
It's a great reminder that this transition isn't just about numbers and technology. It's about people's lives and the future of the planet.
I couldn't agree more.
And I think the report does a good job of balancing that optimism with realism.
It does. It acknowledges the challenges, but it also lays out a clear path forward, highlighting concrete solutions and opportunities.
I agree. It strikes a really good balance.
Yeah.
It doesn't shy away from the complexities, but it doesn't get bogged down in pessimism either. And I think that's so important for a topic like this, because we need that sense of hope and possibility to fuel this transition.
We do. We need to believe that a better future is possible, and then we need to work together to make it a reality.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So we spent a lot of time diving into the intricacies of India's energy transition. But before we wrap up, I want to zoom out a bit and talk about the bigger picture. We've mostly focused on India's domestic energy goals. But this transition has global implications as well, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. India's energy choices have ripple effects that are felt around the world. Remember, it's the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So its actions have a significant impact on global climate change.
That's right. It's a major player on the global stage. So if India can successfully transition to a cleaner energy system, what kind of impact could that have on the global effort to combat climate change?
Well, for one thing, it would send a powerful signal to other countries, particularly developing nations, that a clean energy future is possible.
That's like a proof of concept.
Exactly. India's success could inspire and empower others to follow suit, leading to a more rapid global shift towards renewable energy.
That's so exciting to think about. It's like a domino effect where one country's actions can trigger positive change around the world.
I love that analogy. It's a perfect way to describe it.
And it's not just about setting an example, right?
Yeah.
India's transition to clean energy could also have a direct impact on global emissions reductions.
Oh, absolutely. By reducing its reliance on fossil fuels, India would contribute significantly to the global effort to curb greenhouse gas emissions.
That's huge. It really highlights how interconnected this whole issue is. What other global implications do you see?
Well, beyond climate change, India's clean energy transition could also have a major impact on the global economy. Remember, we talked about India's potential to become a major exporter of green hydrogen.
Yes, that was one of the most interesting solutions they proposed in the report.
Right. If India can capitalize on that opportunity, it could become a major player in the emerging global green hydrogen market.
Wow. So not only would they be boosting their own economy, but they'd also be helping to decarbonize other sectors like shipping and aviation, which are really tough to electrify.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation.
India gets to lead the way in a new industry while also contributing to global decarbonization efforts.
It's a really exciting possibility.
It really is. It paints a picture of a much more sustainable and interconnected global future.
And it all starts with the choices we make today. It's a reminder that we're all part of this global story. And the actions we take, no matter where we are in the world, have a ripple effect that can shape the future for generations to come.
That's a powerful thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive into India's green energy potential, I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us.
It's been my pleasure. It's always inspiring to see people so engaged and curious about this topic.
And to all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the opportunities and challenges ahead as India charts its course towards a cleaner and greener future.
Remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. There's so much more to learn, explore, and discuss. We encourage you to continue researching and stay engaged with this crucial topic.
Keep asking those tough questions. Stay curious. And together, let's build a brighter future for India and for the world.
Until next time, keep diving deep.